Welcome to the Daily Insider here on Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers, and today, Thursday, February 17th, 2022, a lot of college basketball we'll discuss today. Jim Root's going to join us coming up in just a moment. He is of Three Man Weave, which is a really cool site podcast. They really dig deep into college basketball. Stephanie Otey is also going to join us coming up in just a moment. So we have a lot of college hoops to discuss coming up. So you know what? Let's just get it started right now. There's Stephanie Otey. Jim Root, Second Chance Points. That's where you can find him on Twitter. And Jim, good to see you. Good to have you here. And first off, tell us what Three Man Weave is.
Yeah, good to be here. Three Man Weave is a hobby gone right or gone wrong, some might call it. Two of my good friends and I, we went to college together and just kind of realized we would talk college basketball every time we were getting together, hanging out, and it would annoy other people. So we started to do it privately, and then that kind of led to a website. We did previews for all 358 teams, and that's still going today, 7 or 8 years later. Probably what got us our initial notoriety was writing in detail on every team, style, coach, personnel, all that kind of stuff. Then we started the podcast in 2016. And we're just kind of trying to force it into being a full-time career right now with writing, podcasting, shows, anything we can do. We love college hoops and we love talking about it. So glad to do that here today.
Well, one of the other things too is, which I always ask everyone that covers this, how do you cover all of these teams? How do you keep track? I mean, it's one thing, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Pac-12, but you're following the Southland, the Ohio Valley. How do you pay attention to all these teams?
Honestly, the one of the things that made it easier was betting on it and like having a lot of bets going, and you kind of get a sense of who's playing well and who's not, because you're like, oh, I was on that team and they blew a big lead or they got blown out, and you just have a little more of awareness. It's easier to be tuned into some of those teams. Now, there are 358, like you said, there are teams that fall under my radar. There's teams I whiff on completely for the season where I think they're going to be bad and they end up great, but that's part of the fun, because there's so many different teams, there's so many different styles. It's kind of a styles make fight situation. I know it's a boxing phrase, but I love it in college basketball. A lot of different teams, coaches, tempos, offenses, paces. It's great. It's fun to cover all 358. I like to say they're my children. I love them all equally.
Yeah, so I see the SEC in the background. I heard you on Pickwise earlier. You think that they're the dominant conference this year because of some of the teams that they have. I got my start in the Big Ten, so I obviously have, emotions to the Big Ten. Do you feel the same way with SEC? Do you feel like you put a lot of your heart into the SEC, or are you kind of just completely filtered throughout the whole NCAA?
Interestingly, I grew up Big Ten country. I lived outside of Milwaukee, was a Wisconsin fan growing up, loved the Badgers, loved Bo Ryan, even going back to Dick Bennett back in 2000, they made the Final Four run. So I was really hoping when I was attending Mizzou that they would be the team that got sent to the Big Ten rather than Nebraska. And I'd have rivalries with all my friends that went to Big Ten schools from up in that area. But unfortunately, the SEC came calling with their money, and Mizzou certainly picked up that phone. So I like the SEC. I like my Tigers there, but I really always have been Big Ten at heart, going all the way back to my childhood. So I'm kind of with you there.
But what about the super conference that the SEC is trying to do? I know that's a bit of a football thing, but if it moves over to basketball, are you for it?
Not particularly. I'm kind of a purist in the sense that I love like double round robin conferences where every team plays home and away. There's no unbalanced schedules. I wrote a big article like 3 years ago about trying to make every conference 10 teams so that we could have the double round robin. So having like 16 in a league doesn't really appeal to me. It'll make for some good games, but it won't even feel like the same conference anymore. I like when they're smaller and there's more of the 2-game rivalries every year.
Like, Jim, I'll be honest with you. I went to Florida State. I was there. It was a 9-team conference in the ACC. Boston College is not an ACC team. Syracuse, Pitt, they're not ACC teams. Syracuse and Pitt are Big East teams, all right? They're not ACC teams.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to, try to force that narrative on us as we go forward here. And Pitt certainly spoiled an ACC team's season last night. But, yeah, it doesn't feel right. Maybe after 20 years we'll get used to it and it'll feel natural. But the way everything is moving, nothing's staying around for more than 5 or 10 years. So I don't know if we'll actually have time to get used to it. I'm with you. I'm still a big fan of the old Big East, the old Big 12. It just felt more natural at that point.
Now I want to stick I want to stick on that for 1 second with Pittsburgh and the win over North Carolina. Tell me about North Carolina. Like, they've lost 3 games by 20 points or more in conference play. They're up 24-1 on Florida State. They lose to Pitt. I mean, what's wrong with this team?
Well, they don't play defense is their biggest humbug or whatever, that something that they just can't really figure out. They didn't bring in a lot of great defensive individual players in the offseason, and Hubert Davis hasn't figured out how to coach it in his first season. So they're always susceptible to giving up 78 to a Pitt team that has a terrible offense. And right now, UNC has the weird profile resume where they don't have a Q1 win. They haven't beaten a team that's definitely in the tournament yet. And while they have some decent metrics, both predictive and resume stuff, just because they haven't taken a lot of bad losses and they might get in the tournament, it's a boring team to have in the tournament that hasn't really shown it can play above its level. The beat who you're supposed to and lose to who you're supposed to isn't an interesting team profile for me. I kind of like the teams with the upside, like Rutgers has shown over the last 4 games.
You talked about Auburn earlier today on Pickwise, and they obviously, like, Gonzaga moves on back to that first spot. But I was just looking at all the opening odds compared to where they are now. They entered at 4,000 to plus 400 points, but now they're at plus 800. I mean, they dropped so much. So I just want to know what your take is on them. Do you think they can hold it down, or do you think that Gonzaga is like the true top seed here?
I think Gonzaga is the best team and will probably, get the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. It's going to be tough for them to take a loss in the WCC, but I think Auburn is absolutely legit. Now, back last April, they got a couple transfers, including Walker Kessler, and I tweeted out that I was taking them 125-1. That sounds great, but it was a little bit of a lukewarm endorsement, so maybe no one followed me along. I was like, I still don't love the fit of the roster, but the fact that they have, like, maybe the best individual shot blocker in college basketball. I believe Walker Kessler's out blocking every other team in the SEC by himself. So they've got shot blocking, they've got interior defense, and the guards have started to play really well, and especially Wendell Green, Katie Johnson. They've got no lack of confidence in the backcourt. Kind of exemplifies and is a representation of Bruce Pearl, their coach. So they've got size, shot blocking, and now their guard play is catching up with them too. They're definitely one of the top 5 teams that can win the NCAA tournament.
Just as a quick follow-up, just looking at the rest of their schedule, looks doable until they get to Tennessee. So what do you think early on? We're about like 9 days away from that game. Any early expectations there?
It feels like it'll probably be a rock fight. I think both teams are better defensively than they are offensively. Tennessee just lost one of their key big guys, Olivier Kamwa, for the year, but they're really deep. They've had some young guys step in and fill his spot. And they just got that big win over Kentucky where they were kind of dominant the whole way. So it feels like probably a coin flip. I'm curious to see because, if Auburn wins out, they could also get that number 1 overall seed and take it from Gonzaga. That'll probably be the pivotal game for that number 1 seed, the top left corner of your bracket. Everybody looks right up there first. We'll see from that game who gets that spot.
Jim, what do you think about Auburn's friends down the street, Alabama? That they were in the Sweet 16 last year. They made a lot of moves with Nate Oates. They fire away from 3-point range. They have wins this year over Baylor, Gonzaga, and Houston, but yet they have some questionable losses. We saw they didn't shoot well against Kentucky at home a few weeks ago. Do you think Alabama can somewhat get it together and make a run, or do you think that those wins against those Final Four teams from last year were a bit of a sham?
They're hard to figure out. They lost to my Mizzou Tigers, and you can't do that this season. That's unacceptable. They're probably the biggest opposite of UNC, where I said they beat who they're supposed to and lose to the other teams. Alabama will beat anybody on any given day, and they'll lose to anybody. And that creates such a high variance. They're hard to predict. They take so many threes. Last year, they were really a good shooting team. They made a lot of those threes, and that's what made them so deadly. But this year, the shooting, the roster doesn't fit the style as well as it did last year. And that makes them so volatile. I'm kind of looking for them if they're in a 5 or 6 game against a mid-major or a team that won the playing game in Dayton that I actually trust, I will probably be against Alabama this year. And I love Nate Oates as much as anybody. I have a signed Nate Oates picture that someone sent me because I was beating the drum for him in the past. But I just this roster doesn't fit his style the way that the last year's did. So I kind of think they're at risk of going out early.
Looking at March just around the corner, I have to ask about the Big Ten. Right now, Purdue looks great. They cut their odds in half. They got a great point guard in Jaden. He's averaging nearly 17.5 points per game. Who do you think they're the top for the Big Ten to take it the furthest in the tournament, or do you think that there could be another team in the Big Ten that surpasses them?
Yeah, I'd probably go Purdue, but they're at risk because they fit this profile of teams with totally elite offense. They have the number one offense in the country per KenPom using the efficiency type rankings, but their defense is bad. It's outside the top 100. That has been like the blueprint for a team that gets upset early. Last year, that was Iowa, a team that had this mega elite offense led by Luka Garza. They couldn't get stops, and it bit them in the second round against Oregon. They gave up like 1.3 points per possession. And it's not just Iowa. Like you go back through the years and the teams with the elite offense, but defense can't stop anybody is who gets upset. Like my Missouri Tigers in 2012 had the number one offense in the country, were outside the top 100, and they lost as a 2 seed to number 15 Norfolk State. So as much as I do love Purdue and they've got a good coach, they've got the center duo in Otey and Travion Williams, and Ivy, like you said, a probable lottery pick. If they're not defending, then that's where they could get, dicey in the NCAA tournament. So Illinois is probably up there with them, but I would still give Purdue the nod, even despite that defense.
So Jim, riddle me this in the Big Ten. Figure out Rutgers for me, please. They beat Purdue on a buzzer beater. They take care of Illinois. They beat Wisconsin, beat Ohio State. Sorry, Steph. They beat Michigan State. They beat Iowa, but they lose to Northwestern, lose to Minnesota, lose to Penn State. What team is this?
You never know what Rutgers is.
Yeah, no idea. I mean, they lost at home to Lafayette in the non-conference. Like you can't do that. That is, man. They remind me a little bit of Providence 2 years ago, a team that got down to like 80th, 90th in national rankings, couldn't do anything, and then they won 8 of their last 10. Including a bunch of really good wins in the Big East. Now, we didn't have the NCAA tournament that year, so I wish we had an example to go off of with Providence. But the fact that they've had these opportunities in the Big Ten and have taken advantage of them, I kind of buy it. They're well coached. Last year, they made the NCAA tournament. They should have beaten Houston, a team that went to the Final Four, but they collapsed late and gave up a big lead. So potentially this Rutgers team with Ron Harper, with Geo Baker, they've got a lot of experience. I think they're probably closer to this high end of the outcome that they've shown some of these big wins lately. But there's also that risk. Like if their offense goes cold, if they're not knocking down outside shots, they are also vulnerable as well. So I think they're probably a tournament team and one that will maybe win a game, but the upside is limited by the fact that their offense has some issues.
Yeah, Providence is another one of those teams whose odds just completely got sliced down the further they got in the season. Are they the real deal? Or Kevin and I were talking earlier, they're top ranked in luck this season. Is what Kevin put it. And do you agree, or do you think that they can control their destiny to a certain point?
Yeah, they're such an interesting case. They've been like one of the hot button teams all season this year because of the way their resume really outranks their predictive rankings, and they've won so many close games. Their losses, a couple have been really big blowouts, so that knocks them down in predictive rankings. But some of the close game success, I think, is sustainable, and it's represented as luck on KenPom's website, where he's talking about your wins over expected based on your scoring margin. But they win close games because they start 4 graduate students in the starting lineup. And their coach has consistently won close games over his entire career. I think he's over 60% in games decided by 6 or less. So that's like a sustainable thing that they have going, but it's risky. It's a risky strategy if you're playing that many close games in March. It just takes one game where you miss a couple shots late or the other team gets hot in the final 5 minutes. So I believe they're pretty legit, but it's just a risky strategy to play that way in a single elimination tournament come March.
Is Ed Cooley coach of the year for you?
I think right now, nationally, it's him or Tommy Lloyd at Arizona. I think both those guys have taken what was there and really, really elevated it above expectations. If Ed Cooley does end up winning the Big East over Villanova, who they're a game up on right now, then I would probably give him the nod just because that team is picked middle of the pack. The roster isn't loaded with potential pros. I think he's done a terrific job with them getting victories. So he's top 2 candidate, no doubt.
Now, Jim, the Big 12, Missouri's former conference, Baylor, Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, all top 15, Ken Palm. Texas Tech beat Baylor last night. We saw how Kansas beat up Baylor a while ago, but Baylor's still the defending national champions. Who do you have going the furthest out of those teams? I know we don't know the matchups in the tournament, but who do you like going the furthest out of those 4 teams?
Dang, that's a good question. I guess I haven't thought about it that way. I'm going to eliminate Texas because I just don't really trust them right now. Don't trust the offense. Trey Mitchell, one of their key front court pieces, just took a leave of absence, so I'll knock them out. Kansas, I was high on coming into the season, but that maybe their upside depends if they can get Remy Martin back in the fold. The Arizona State transfer point guard was supposed to really raise their ceiling offensively, and he's been out, so that's an issue. Baylor just lost their starting power forward or starting center to the season with a bunch of torn ligaments in his knee. I kind of think I'm trusting Texas Tech the most right now. The one concern for them is that a lot of their work has been done at home in front of their great home crowd in Lubbock, and they're not going to have that benefit come NCAA tournament time. But I was at the Final Four in 2019, and that fan base traveled really, really well. So while it won't be home games for them in the NCAA tournament, I do think they're going to have a lot of fans in the stands, going to have a lot of energy to feed off of there. Kansas will have probably the best path, but right now I think I trust Texas Tech the most.
In the ACC, Duke and Notre Dame are neck and neck. Neither of them face any ranked opponents for the remainder of their season. Between the two of them, how do you think it's looking? I mean, they're neck and neck.
Yeah, I would go Duke. They're better. They've got some question marks. They've had some home court performances where they kind of let off the gas against bubble caliber teams. It was Miami or Virginia, the losses, and even just this narrow win over Wake Forest recently. But they've probably got 5 first-round picks on the roster. That's their starting lineup. The talent is undeniable. Notre Dame's been consistent, solid, but I think they've benefited more from a down ACC. Duke they're erratic. They're young. They have some lapses because of that youth. So I especially in the NCAA tournament, I think Duke has a much, much higher upside. But the actual regular season title, it's interesting. Coach K hasn't won or shared a regular season title in the ACC since 2010, almost over a decade for a guy that is a legend and has had some really good teams. So I kind of think maybe Notre Dame's consistency and experience bears out, and they get the regular season crown. But Duke's definitely the team you want to have an eye on come March Madness.
Well, that's why Duke is replacing their coach now, getting a new coach next year.
Yeah, you got to fire him. Get him out of there.
They need to get rid of this guy. We need to get somebody else that can win some tournaments for us,
That's exactly it.
Now, Gonzaga, I want to go back to them for a second, Jim. The WCC has improved. San Francisco, St. Mary's, they're in the top 25 in Ken Palm. Obviously, Gonzaga's at the top. Gonzaga getting to, in a sense, the goal line last year, losing to Baylor in the championship. Mark Few still doesn't have a title, and everyone criticizes Gonzaga for being in a weaker conference. What do you call that? What would you say? You said something on Twitter yesterday. What do you call the WCC? Is that a high mid-major? How do you classify that?
Yeah, high major. It's probably equivalent to like an A10, or especially if you exclude Gonzaga, it's equivalent to A10, Mountain West kind of thing, where teams will be good in cycles. They will, especially the teams that get experience, they can have good years, but there's not a lot of like reload type teams that are good every single season. So I get like they're not playing a potential bubble team every single game like some of these other leagues, but if any other school had gone to 2 title games in 5 years, I think we'd say that's great. That is outstanding performance in the NCAA tournament. But because it's Gonzaga, because they are coming from the WCC, and a lot of people want to cut that down, the fact that they haven't won a title is the lasting narrative. But I don't buy it. The Big Ten hasn't won a title since 2000. The Pac-12 hasn't won one since 1997, I think. So it's not about the conference. That's not what the deal is. Big Ten's tough every year, and none of those teams win. So it's more just it's really hard to win a title. 6 games in 3 weeks is really, really tough to win. I do think Mark Few gets there eventually, and I think this is actually the year. But I've said that before. I said it last year, and I was wrong. So who knows? As long as he's not getting upset early, I think we can just kind of let Gonzaga have the narrative that they're good. They're just really good.
I also wanted to ask you about Kentucky because they have 2 big games circled on their schedule, mainly, Alabama, you talked about them. You're not really leaning towards them this year. They also have Arkansas. Do you think that those 2 games might get in the way of them surpassing Auburn or Gonzaga when it comes to the tournament?
Yeah, Kentucky's tricky right now because their best is right up there with Auburn, with Gonzaga. Like they may be the best team when they're fully healthy, but their freshman guard Ty Washington has been hobbled by an ankle injury for multiple games, and it really hurt them against Tennessee. He played 13 minutes, tried to give it a go on that bum ankle, and he just clearly wasn't the same. But they were winning at Auburn before Ty Washington got hurt. They were winning at LSU before he got hurt. So he's shown a little bit of propensity to get injured, and that's the risk in a single elimination tournament. You can't have him get hurt, but if they rest him down the stretch here and maybe they take a loss against Alabama and or Arkansas, that's okay. For them, it's Kentucky, it's Big Blue Nation. They're looking at national titles. They don't care about these games in February. So I think the important thing for them is to get Washington healthy, and if they do, then they're a real threat come March.
Do you think that's what they'll end up doing, resting him for those 2 games, even the remainder of the regular season?
I hope so. I mean, even if it's, a week and get him back, but he clearly wanted to play in that game at Tennessee, and they gave him a shot, but he didn't even take a single 2-pointer. He had no explosion. He went 0 for 2 from deep, and it's just not the same player. And trying to make him play on that ankle, that's not how it gets healthier. So I think they'll be forced to give him some time off, even if it's not what he wants. It's better for him and for the team long term.
Yeah, he's projected to be the NBA lottery pick. I think that he needs to protect himself and stay ready for the tournament.
Now, Jim, let's look at a couple best bets for today, and I want to start in the Colonial. This UNC Wilmington team at 12-2, I feel like is most disrespected first-place team in the entire country. Every game they're an underdog, and today they're getting points against Towson at home. Towson's in second place of the Colonial, but every game UNC Wilmington, it always feels like they're a dog or a very short favorite, and they lost to Elon, which is inexcusable, and then they fell to Hofstra on the road. But what do you think about this game today between Towson and UNC Wilmington?
Yeah, Wellington was like shaky in the non-con. They struggled, and then they had a COVID pause and completely changed their offense. And so for most teams, the pause hurts, but it gave them a chance to kind of like step back and revolutionize what they were doing. And then they ripped off a bunch of wins in the Colonial. But some of it was maybe a little bit fluky. I don't want to say fluky, but they got down double digits in 6 out of 8 games and won them all outright. So they were a team that was coming from behind, digging themselves holes. They've already beaten this Towson team at Towson in overtime, but I think the Tigers are the better team. Obviously, the line indicates that with them being road favorites. I would still lay it with the Tigers. I think the fact that they did take that L at home, the little bit of a revenge flip-flop going on the road, I think they can beat them up inside. They have a better front court than Wilmington. And with Terry Nolan, their point guard, getting healthy, I like Towson to get the revenge there and tie them atop the CAA standings after today.
Another one coming up just in a few hours in the Big Ten, Minnesota, Penn State. Minnesota started really strong with him once, Big Ten play happened. They kind of faltered off. But Penn State off of a huge win, upsetting my Buckeyes, Ohio State. Are you leaning towards the Nittany Lions for this one?
I'm not taking a side. I'm a little nervous about the side. I was on Minnesota when they won at home and beat Penn State, but that was dicey. It was not a stress-free win, as we like to say. But I'm against the market here with the under. I think the under is a really good play. Both these teams are thin, don't have a ton of depth. They both play really slow. And for both of them, it's their second game this week. So I think they're going to try to keep it slow. It's going to be a half-court grinding game. And it's a weird early tip, as you alluded to. So I think that also is a little edge for the under. I took this at 127. It's up to 128.5 at BetMGM, as you guys can see. But I still think it's the right side to be on, unless both teams are making a ton of shots, which is the risk. But tempo, I think, is going to be on our side, and I think the under is strong there.
And the final game we'll look at with you, Jim, Pac-12 later, Oregon and Arizona State. Oregon 0-4 against the spread the last 4. They barely beat Washington State back on Monday. Arizona State, they've been a disappointment this year, but they beat UCLA in triple overtime. They just beat Washington State as a 10.5-point underdog. So now, do you like Oregon here to snap their ATS skid, even though they played well, or take the points at home with the Sun Devils?
I like Oregon. I think they snapped that skid. They broke my heart against Washington State earlier this week. They were up 9, shooting free throws, and somehow only won by 3 in regulation and blew my -3.5. But I'm not going to let that affect me. Always focus on the next bet. I think the Ducks can go on the road and get revenge here the same way Towson did, because Arizona State won at Oregon in a game that based on shot quality, a website I like to reference was a big Oregon win. It's just, sometimes shots go in for the wrong team, and Arizona State was able to pull that one out. The Ducks still have a lot more to play for. They're right on the cut line of the NCAA tournament, basically last team in or first team out, depending on the bracketologist you look at. So you couple that with the fact that they're going to be highly motivated after the loss to Arizona State earlier this year. I think the Ducks go on the road and cover as a short road favorite.
Yeah, you mentioned Washington State. Have you looked into their game against UCLA tonight? Do you have a side here?
I'm not betting this game. I thought it would be a little bit higher. I thought I'd be getting like 11 or so, and I'd probably have to take Washington State. But they're kind of like the opposite Providence is kind of what the narrative I'm painting. They're basically ranked the same in all predictive rankings, and Providence is going to be a 3 seed, and Washington State isn't sniffing the tournament. They just haven't gotten the big wins, haven't won down the stretch against key opponents, and that's prevented them from actually getting in the picture. But they are pretty good if you just look at scoring margin. So if it had been like 11 and a half, I probably would have taken the points with Wazoo. But UCLA has had a little time off. You got Jaime Jaquez getting his ankles healthier. He's struggled with injury recently. So for that one, I'm just going to stay away.
Jim, before we let you go, the most important question we have to ask, and we save for the end. Who has the uglier home court, Oregon or Memphis?
Memphis, no hesitation for me. That one is like an eyesore anytime I turn it on. Like the electric blue Kool-Aid color, I don't love it. Oregon's not pretty either, but I kind of get the gimmick. The same way I get the gimmick of like Florida International has a beach painted on their court. But the colors of Memphis just it doesn't do it for me.
It's like a weird YMCA type court thing that they're doing at Memphis. I just don't know. And I think Manhattan also should get some run because they also have like that green thing going. They still do that?
I think so. Yeah. Some of the schools doing like the silhouette of the skyline, I kind of like if it's unique, but the weird colorations, I don't need that. It doesn't have the charm of Boise State's blue football field. I'll say that.
That's true. That is very true. Jim Root, you could find him on Twitter at Second Chance Points, also Three Man Weave, the podcast. Tell us about it again before we let you go.
Yeah, that we don't write as much on the site right now because we're writing for Action Network, for Pickswise, and doing shows for Field of 68. So we're doing a whole bunch trying to keep our hands in as many cookie jars as we can towards the end of the season. But we'll have a lot of preview stuff coming for the NCAA tournament, for conference tournaments. All will come from our Twitter handle at 3MW_CVB. All our content can be found there. So check that out if you feel so inclined.
Jim, thank you so much for the time. And we'll catch up with you before the brackets get announced.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good. Jim Root, always good talking to him. And a lot of good information. And just like I asked him at the top, Stephanie, how do you follow 358 teams?
Yeah. So I was always wondering that. I love following one. I love being a team reporter for one team. You get their wins, their losses. But once you get into looking at it from a bigger picture, it's hard to keep up with everything. This is my first year doing NFL and college football and betting adds a whole new layer to it where you're diving deeper into making projections and looking at odds. There's so much to look into, but covering it from a league-wide angle, it's hard to keep up with everything. Like, how does Adam Schefter do it? You know what I mean? Like, how does he have inside knowledge everywhere? Well,
it's like I look at college basketball, like even today, and you get into, Thursday is normally a really busy day. And then you get down to like the extra games on the board. And it's like Fairleigh Dickinson and Merrimack and Long Island, St. Francis, Pennsylvania. And you're like,
just in basketball in general, you have much more games than you do in football. Smaller rosters, but yeah, a lot.
It's a lot. And, this is the way I always characterize it. I'll give you the simple math on it. Think about the NBA. You have 30 teams. You have 358 teams in college basketball. It's 12 NBAs you're covering.
Yeah.
Like, it's just way too much. And it's a lot, but these guys are dedicated, and that's what they do. So they're on top of it, and a great job by them. And, so at least the only good news is once we get towards March Madness, shrinks a little bit, so you don't have to worry about 300 something teams anymore. So
yes, yeah, and that's when everyone starts to get involved. And do you notice this too? Like everyone who does not pay attention to basketball or they just pay attention to college hoops in March, their brackets are always the best. Like
it's all a guessing game. It is all just.
I'm an overanalyzer. I will look at things like till ad nauseum, until I can't do it anymore. So it's to the point where like you see so much information and you're just contradicting yourself so much. They just blindly do it and they have much better luck. It's like, why did I spend all that time looking into it?
Well, it's like what's it called? It's like that Warren Buffett thing where I'm going to give $1 million or $5 million. Somebody's got a perfect bracket. I'm like, you can offer somebody $100 billion. They're not going to get it.
And
to go 64, no, it's impossible.
When I was in high school, I remember a kid at my school submitted a bracket to, it was one of the outlets. He did it online and it was like down to the like Elite 8, I think. And he had a perfect bracket. And I think it was at least the Elite 8. It might have even gone to Final 4, but perfect every single game. And I remember like he was on like local news stations and things like that because he didn't get one game wrong. So someone's had to have done it before.
It's just so hard because all it takes is that one 13 or 14 seed to win that one game, not even go to the Final Four, just to win that one game. And
it was 2019 when the 16th seed, the only time in all of history, upset the top seed. And everyone's like, why am I even watching this anymore? I wonder what the ratings were like. Every single bracket just shattered.
Well, that was the best one because Virginia lost, and then they had the greatest revenge ever by winning the next year's national championships. It's like, well, you know, you end up winning the title, but you're always going to be known as the team that lost to a 16 seed. So
yeah, because I mean, no one's going to forget that. No one.
You're right. They may not remember you win a championship, but no one's ever going to forget you lost to a 16 seed.
That is true. They're the only team that's ever done it.
And you know what, too, is that to defend Virginia for a second, you see that UMBC team wasn't that bad. It's always go to luck of the draw. What if you would have played a different 16 seed?
Yeah.
Maybe you would have gone further. That you have 4 of them, so the one you get is probably better than we think. And there's always going to be like a 13 or 14 that's worse than we think. And it's all just.
But if those 2 teams played like 10 times, how many times would Virginia have won out of the 10 times? You know?
Yeah. I'd say probably 9 times. I just think you have one bad night. Your offense isn't great anyway.
That's the worst day to have a bad night.
Seriously. And then everyone remembers it because, again, a lot of people may not remember a lot of championships, but these upsets, no one ever forgets them. They always remember these teams. Say, oh, this was a 15 seed that won. This was a 16 seed that won. But, yeah, we're looking forward to
how far that 16th seed went into the
second round.
So I all I remember is top seed losing. I don't remember how far that 16th seed went.
Well, and also I think UMBC played Kansas State, if I'm not mistaken, and they hung with them for a bit and then lost. So they didn't get blown out because that's always the thing is that these 15 or 16 seeds would win and then they just get blown out the next game because they're so high off of the win. But some of them still, Florida Gulf Coast.
Did you bet on that game after they won the first round? See, yeah, that'd be a tough one.
Yeah.
Because imagine them doing it again. Like,
well, I think you got value in going against them because now Virginia is, you know what? Hold on one second. Well, I have you here. I'm going to look this up really fast because I can do this fast. I want to see. Virginia must have been laying like 20 or something in that game.
Yeah, I wonder what that spread was going into it.
Let's see. This was.
I would love to know of like how many people it took Virginia to lose that game.
Oh, it was 17-18. Hold on one second. They were laying 20.5 against UMBC. They lost by 20. A lot of people forget that. They didn't lose to the buzzer. They lost by 20.
Yeah, they got shattered. Yeah.
They got destroyed in that game. Now, UMBC.
Dang. I mean, that's just like. That might be like one of the most like monumental moments in March Madness history. It has to be.
Oh, definitely, because no one ever thought that it would happen.
But how undermining is it if it ever does happen again to another 16 seed? How much does it undermine them? You know what I mean? Because it's so hard to do. But now that one team has done it, like, does it downgrade?
It's still a major thing. I mean, like, think about this. Like Gonzaga, for as good as they are, if they lost to a 16, absolutely. And then everyone would go, well, Gonzaga's a fraud anyway, even though I don't think they're a fraud, but well, I'm wrong here.
I mean, yeah. I mean, every team is capable of losing at some point, you know, like guys can get hurt. But people would know that going into betting on it. So I mean, that was just like a profound game. Oh, man.
Kansas State was laying 10 to UMBC in the second round, and they won 50-43. So they won so they didn't cover, but they won by 10. I knew it was a close game, but so Maryland.
But they're, I mean, if they went from a 20 points underdog to a 10,
Yeah,
they cut that in half. So
yeah,
I don't know what I would have done there. I think it's very reasonable to say that, Kansas would cover, but
yeah. But
right after that, beating Virginia by over 20 points, like that'd be hard to take.
yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I guess it's the stay away and just watch.
Because who was really even following them throughout the season to see what they were capable of,
Well, that's the other one too, is that UMBC, and the only advantage they have over Virginia is that Virginia's all their games are on TV. You don't watch UMBC games on TV, so they can kind of sneak up. And that was kind of the story with Butler a long time ago when they went to the Final Four, and even George Mason, that no one really knew these teams. Doesn't mean you're not good. It just means you're not on national TV. And in a one-game setting.
Yeah, the eye test helps you, though, especially when you're looking at matchups. It helps to see them play the game other than just looking at stats. Because stats can be misleading sometimes,
Oh, they could definitely be misleading. Like, they absolutely can be. But, yeah, it turned out, I mean, it was like a 1 in a million. But, I just think that there's such a gap between when you look at these teams, Gonzaga, Baylor, Auburn. I just can't see a 16 seed doing it again. It's just so rare.
How many years has the tournament been in existence, and it happened only one time?
Well, since 1985, that was when it went to 64. I know it's gone to like 68 or whatever, but like that's when it went to the 4-16. So 1985, so almost 40, 30, 37 years or so that it's been. So yeah, one time out of all of these. It's rare. So really rare. So that's it for today, Stephanie. That's all.
On that note.
That's on that note. All right. So we will talk again Tuesday. So looking forward to that. We have the holiday Monday, and then Tuesday we'll be back. No NBA because they're on the All-Star break starting tomorrow. So we'll have a little break from that. Tom Carroll will join us tomorrow. So we'll talk more college hoops, talk some NBA as well. Jim Root, very happy he joined us. Good stuff from him. Yeah, really, really good stuff. For Stephanie Otey, I'm Kevin Rogers. We'll talk to you again. Stephanie will be back coming up on Tuesday, so looking forward to that. And I'll talk to you again tomorrow right here on the Daily Insider. And as always, best of luck with your bets.